I think that is repaired. All right, so we're in Bereishis chapter 14, verse 18. We're talking about Melchizedek, who was the king of Shalem, the king of Jerusalem, and he came out and greeted Abraham and fed him and his soldiers as they were coming back from war. And the king of Sodom didn't do that. The king of Sodom just greeted Abraham and started negotiating. So we pointed out last week that the Melchizedek was Shem. He was the son of Noach, and he was a righteous person. His title was Melchizedek. He was a person that pursued justice and righteousness, and he was the king of a city called Shalem, which means completion, perfection, and peace. So it was very appropriate that he was the one that cared to feed Abraham. So that was Melchizedek, and that was the first half of the verse. The second half of the verse, of verse 18, gives us his other title. He was Kohen L'Kel Elyon. He was a priest. He was a Kohen for the highest God, which means God. He's someone who worshiped God, and he was a priest for God. He taught people about God. Now, what was this title? The title that he gave God, who is the same God that we worship, same God that Abraham worshipped. He called him Kel Elyon, the highest God. And this is a name that it was his title. He was the Kohen, the priest for the highest God. And also it was the way he referred to God. He kept, on the next few verses, he blessed Abraham to the highest God, I guess, in the name of the highest God. And then he blessed God also. And he called him Kel Elyon, the highest God. So he keeps invoking this name, Kel Elyon, the highest God. What does that title mean? What does it say about God? So for us, it's a little bit of an uncomfortable way to refer to God. Which, by the way, we refer to him like that every day. In Shemona Esrei, we say Kel Elyon, the highest God. But that's a little bit of an uncomfortable title because we only believe in one God. And if Shem worshipped that one God, then how could there be a highest God? That implies that there were lower gods, and he worshipped the highest one. And other people didn't. Other people worshipped lower gods. So this is really a double difficulty for us, because if you do believe in one God, then there's no highest God. There's just one. And if you believe in many gods, then there also isn't a highest God. Every God is powerful. So what would be the highest God? How does our God how can our God be referred to as the highest God, either by us or by idol worshippers? Either way, he can't be called the highest God. So who is this highest God that Shem worshipped? And it wasn't just Shem, it was Abraham also. In verse 22, Abraham refers to Kel Elyon, the highest God. Now he adds a name. He adds the name Hashem, which is how we refer to him. But he said both. He said Hashem Kel Elyon. So this concept of the highest God, what does that mean to us as believers in one God, and what does that mean to idolaters? So in order to try to explain this, we need to discuss a little bit of the theology of the ancient idolaters. And in the process, we'll get a better appreciation for our own theology, our own understanding of God. And this is going to get a little bit complicated, so you need to be fully awake for this one.
And some coffee.
But if you miss all the philosophy, we can still get the takeaway. So let's talk about this concept of God. There's a book with a very very provocative title. It's called God versus Gods. It's the relationship of the Jewish people to idolatry throughout the years. So let's talk about that concept of God versus gods. The highest God versus lower gods. What does that all mean? So let's start with idolatry. We live in the 21st century. There are very few idolaters left. And we look at them as very primitive, childish people. We think in the way that there's one of the prophets says, I don't remember which, it's one of the Haftarahs that we read, where he describes that a person takes a log, he cuts it up, half of the log becomes his firewood for his supper, he cooks his dinner on the firewood, and then the other half he carves into a god and bows down to it and says, "You are my father, you are my God," which is ridiculous. And that's what the prophet was saying. He was ridiculing the idea of idolatry, but he went a little bit too far for it to make any sense. I mean, what exactly was going on with idolatry that people could do that? How can you take a piece of wood and claim that it created the world? How could you, even if it's a mistaken understanding, it has to make some kind of sense. It looks to us very primitive, very childish, and incomprehensible. But the reason it looks so childish to us is that we're taking a very immature view of the prophet's words. When the prophet describes taking a piece of wood and half of it becomes firewood and the other half becomes a god, he was being a little bit sarcastic. He was making fun of them. But we need to look at it with a little bit more of a mature view of it, because these were intelligent people. They may have been mistaken in their understanding of theology, but these were intelligent people. The Romans did things like this. The Romans created idols and bowed down to them. They were the leaders of science in a relatively recent time. Leaders in technology.
The Greeks.
The Greeks also. Now, whoops. Okay. Is everyone still there? I don't know what's going on with this computer. Okay, anyway. So it hasn't been that long. These were regular, intelligent people, and they were doing this idolatry. What was it? What was it about idolatry that was meaningful to them? If it was just a matter of taking a piece of wood and bowing down to it. Now, it's tempting in our modern era to explain it as these were actually primitive people. These were people that were at a lower evolutionary level than us, and they hadn't yet developed the intelligence that we have today. Now, I don't particularly subscribe to evolution, but even if you do, even if we're going to countenance that idea, it really doesn't help you anything, because we're talking about 2,000 years, 3,000 years. And even today, there still are idolaters. So evolution has nothing to do with this. These were fully intelligent, fully developed people, and they did this. So there must be something more to it than the way we think of it in our Western culture. So yes, the prophet does make fun of it that way. He talks about bowing down to your firewood, but there's more to it than what he's describing. He's being very sarcastic when he describes it that way. So a little bit more of a mature look at what idolatry would be, I don't know if this is quite the truth, but it's closer to the truth. If we think in terms of nature gods, a pantheon of lower gods, gods of nature. So if you had this idea that each one of the forces of nature is governed by a different power. So each god has its sphere of influence, his sphere of influence or her sphere of influence, and each one tries to dominate all the others in the particular sphere that it's in charge of. And the gods all balanced each other out. So you had, let's say, the god of the sea, and the god of the sea tries to make a big storm and flood the world, but he is not successful because the god of wind is blowing back in the other direction, and the god of the earth is pushing back at the shore, and the sea can't flood the earth. So any one of these powers, in the way they would have looked at it, each force of nature was governed by a different god, and each god would go out and destroy the world with his unlimited power, except for the fact that there are other gods that are balancing him out. That's a little more credible than the idea of just bowing down to a stick and saying, this stick created me. It's also a little bit more realistic. It's closer to reality. Because if you take the gods out of it, there are physical forces of nature, and they do balance each other out. It is true that the ocean would flood the entire world, if not for the fact that there was a perfect balance of altitude and forces that prevent there from being enormous storms, the exact temperature and wind circulation that allows storms to remain what they are and not become overwhelming and destroy the world. These are all forces of nature, and they're all in perfect balance, and they all balance each other out. So that is true. What isn't true is to ascribe, to assign a god to each one of these forces. But that's something that people believed in. Gods of nature. Each force of nature belongs to a certain god, and each god wants to express himself to the greatest extent possible. Now, for people who believed in that kind of thing, it was possible to pray to one of the gods or to sacrifice to one of the gods in order to appease him. So let's say there's a storm coming. You can pray to the god of storm and save yourself from storm. In fact, the Native Americans believed the reason there's a calm before the storm is because the gods of storm are giving you a moment to pray, that it shouldn't be too damaging. In addition to these nature gods, people believed in gods of specific regions or specific climates. There was a god of the desert. There was a god of the sea. There was a god of Babylon, and there was a god of Egypt. Each location had its god, and each climate had its god. If you were in Egypt, you needed to know how to access the Egyptian god, and if you were sailing at sea, you needed to know how to deal with the sea god in order to have a safe trip across the sea. So that's a more mature view of idolatry. Gets us a little closer to the truth, but I still believe there must be something more to idolatry than just that, than just nature gods. And I'll tell you why. I haven't studied mythology too extensively, but in my minimal experience with mythology, every culture had it. Now you're going to find me the one culture that didn't have it and challenge what I'm saying. That may be true. But it seems it was a very widespread idea. Everyone had their mythology, and everyone believed that their ethnicity was the greatest ethnicity because one of the gods impregnated their ancestress, or because one god became human and he was the ancestor of this particular nation. Everyone had some kind of story like that. Everyone believed in a time when the gods were at large and they were active in creating the world. That's a theme across all the ancient cultures. Now, again, we're talking about intelligent human beings like the Romans and the Greeks the Egyptians, and they all had these ideas of how they were descended from God, or they were descended from a goddess or something like that. They all had this mythology about some kind of some kind of time in the past when the gods were very active. So every one of these cultures, and again, I don't know if it was every culture in the world, but it seems to have been very common. They all invented these similar stories about the gods and how they created the world and how they created specifically our country. Now, this was several millennia before the introduction of fantasy. The genre of fantasy is imagination. That's something that someone could invent. I'll tell you, my main exposure to mythology is from fantasy. I grew up, I was very interested in Tolkien, and I used to read his books a lot. So he invented an entire several volumes of mythology, because apparently the English didn't have their own national mythology, and he wanted to create one. So he did. He invented his own British mythology. Who is that? Tolkien. J.R.R. Tolkien. If you don't know the name, you can leave it that way. It's not important. He's a popular author in the 20th century. Way back. Now, he was an imaginative man. He went through a lot in life. He went through both world wars. And he needed an outlet, maybe. So he needed to use his imagination and invent this world that he created. But he based it on, first of all, it's imagination. It's nothing more than imagination. It was fantasy. And he based it on existing mythology, Norse mythology and other mythologies that existed in Europe. And he used that to create this ridiculous theme. As he wrote himself, he didn't want to get too mythological because he was a Catholic and he had to believe in the one God of the Trinity. So he had to somehow work that in, but he was creating this fantasy world out of mythologies that existed. But if we look at the actual ancient cultures that invented these mythologies that to us look like fantasy novels, and they all did it. So how did all these intelligent people believe in this same idea? This is across the world and across cultures and across times. It would seem obvious, at least to me, and it's also clear from the Torah, that idolatry and mythology is not fantasy. It may have been a misrepresentation, it might be a mistake, but it's based on a true story. Idolatry and mythology is based on a true story.
They truly believed in it.
They truly believed in it. Because if they didn't, they wouldn't all come up with the same ridiculous story or similar ridiculous stories. That's at least my thinking. And that is what you see in traditional Torah sources, that it was based on a true story. It wasn't completely made up. It was a misrepresentation, it was a mistake, but it was a subtle mistake that you and I could also make if we understood theology better. So here's what I gather from Torah sources, and a lot of this is quite a bit above my head, but this is what I gather. God, let's start with our God. God is one, and he is absolute unity. He's absolutely one. What does it mean to be one and only? It means he's not a member of a committee. There's not a pantheon of gods, and God is one of those or the highest of those. He's just one. And he himself is not a committee of gods. That's an important point. We have one God. He's not a group of gods. He's one being. He's an indivisible God. one indivisible absolute unity. So that's a little bit abstract. Let's talk about it in terms of our own personalities, because we are not one. Each one of us is made up of many components. I mean, our bodies are made up of multiple limbs, but our personalities are also made up of multiple components. And in our human character, there is a definite divide between different behaviors and emotions that we express at different times, in different moods, or different roles in life. So I am one person, and if anybody cared to study me and write a biography of me, they would be able to figure out, an underlying theme of my personality, but there would still be multiple people being described. There's me as a professional, there's me as a father, there's me as a husband, there's me as a teacher. I have many roles in life. We all do. Everyone has many roles in life. And we all behave very differently in the office and at home and in other situations. When we're alone, we have a different behavior. At work, you're a professional. At home, you're a father. Everyone has their different roles in life. And we have different moods. Sometimes we're happy and content. And when we are happy and content, we are more agreeable to other people. We're more generous. And sometimes we're not happy. We're anxious or we're angry. And then we're not generous and we're argumentative with people. We're not interested in other people's opinions. These are all separate aspects of our personalities. And when one is active, the other one is not. Each one of us is many different people because we're human. There's also different stages in our lives. Let's say at one age I enjoyed a certain hobby, then I got older and I dropped the hobby. So for example, I enjoy biking. Very possibly 40 years from now, I might consider biking to be too much of a bother. It's I'll be older and maybe more tired, and I won't want to bike around. So that changes. We change. We're not one. We're multiple. There's multiple parts of our personality. There's multiple roles in life, and there's multiple stages in life. And at each one, we express ourselves in very different ways. That's us. That's not God. God is one, and he's indivisible. That means he doesn't have multiple personalities, and he doesn't have multiple moods or stages in life or stages in history. He's just one. He's one being, and he's indivisible.
What does it mean, indivisible?
Can't be divided.
Can't be divided.
He can't be divided into multiple parts. He's just one. Now, a word that comes to mind here is infinite. God is infinite. He's infinitely one. His infinite oneness, which is something that we can't comprehend. Something that's completely indivisible. It's not built of parts. It's something we can't imagine because it's beyond our experience. But God is someone who is one and he can't change. And he's infinitely one, and he's infinitely indivisible. Now here's the difficulty. God created the universe. Do you agree? How do you do that? If he's infinite and he's one and he's indivisible, then how can there be a universe that's separate from him and he created it and he relates to it and he reacts to what we do? If he's unchangeable and he doesn't have different moods and he doesn't have different behaviors depending on what's going on in the world, then how could he even have decided to make a world, and how could there be a world? And none of this makes any sense. That's a paradox, a theological paradox that people have struggled with for millennia. But he did. That's the most important part. He did. He is one, he is infinite, and he did create this universe. Now, I can't reproduce this for you right now, but it can be demonstrated from nature and history that God does all these things. God does directly relate to our world, even though our world is not infinite and it's somehow separate from him, and yet he is infinite, so there can't be anything separate from him. It's a paradox, but it's something that's observable, it's something that is true. So what do we do with it? What do we do with this paradox? We can philosophize about it. We can explain it, and then we can challenge the explanation, and we can go a little deeper and explain it again and challenge that, and then go a little deeper and then explain it and challenge that. We can keep on.
And get anywhere.
Well, we can get somewhere, but we can keep going further and further, philosophizing about God is infinite, and yet he created this finite world and relates to it. But we'll just keep going and going. And in fact, we don't even have to do the work, because this has all been thought through for millennia. This has been discussed and discussed and discussed. And there's plenty of, we can get the right literature. There's plenty of literature that goes and discusses this paradox and explains it as far as the human mind can go. That's an important caveat. As far as the human mind can go, we're not infinite ourselves, so we can't go to the end, but we can go pretty far. But no matter how much we study and philosophize and read, and however much we explain and understand, we can exhaust this subject, but we're still going to have the paradox. So we're going to understand things a lot better than I just explained them if we keep on going deeper and deeper into the subject and explaining it and philosophizing about it and studying it. We'll understand it a lot better than what I just explained. But the paradox will still exist. God is infinite, and yet he relates, he created this finite world and he relates to it. So in our human mind, there has to be somewhere along the line a disconnect between God and the universe. In our human minds. That's not true. There isn't a disconnect. But in our human minds, there has to be a disconnect between God and the universe. For one simple reason. Let's say I have the number 1, and I double it to 2, and I double it again. And I keep doubling it forever. Will I ever get to infinity? No, because infinity is infinite. No number of finite numbers can add up to infinity. So as much as we talk about God creating the world, as long as the world is finite and God isn't, there has to be a disconnect in our minds, in our human minds. But we look in the Torah and we look at nature and history and we learn that there is no disconnect. God directly created the world and of his own active free will, without any help, without any intermediary powers, and he's intimately involved in every small detail of the world's affairs. Everything that goes on in the world, no matter how small of a detail, God is involved in that. So, yes, it's a paradox, but it's also a fact. In our minds, there has to be a disconnect, but there isn't a disconnect between God and the universe. Now, I just told you that no matter how much we philosophize, we're never going to get the answer. I'm going to tell you the answer. Ready for this?
Sure.
The answer is that you need to be a little bit more humble. Now, you can believe that you're the greatest person in the world and the strongest and the smartest and everything else. As long as you can admit that you're not infinite, then this is very easily explainable. And the explanation is we're not infinite. So we can explain it as far as our minds can go, but we are bound by being human, we're bound by our physical universe, and we can't comprehend God. God is infinite. He's infinitely one, but we can't comprehend, and therefore we can't comprehend him. So we can go higher and higher. We can keep going up those numbers, but we're never going to get to infinity. God understands. It's not a paradox from his perspective, but from ours, it will always be a paradox. So the disconnect is not between God and the universe. It's between our little human minds and God's infinite mind. And that's the answer. Which means, even if you didn't understand anything I just said, and you missed all that philosophy, it really doesn't matter. As long as you understand that God is one, infinitely one, and God is infinitely connected with every detail of this universe. And if you don't understand that, it's because you're human. So I'm sorry. But that's just the limitation of being part of this universe. When you become infinite, then you'll understand.
Which will never be.
That will never be. So God understands. We don't. We can get all the way to the end of our understanding, but then there is a disconnect between us, our understanding, and God. But there's no disconnect between God and the universe. Now, listen very carefully. I did not just say that this makes no sense. That's because you can't understand it, so accept it on faith. I didn't say that. What I did say is, this is an observable phenomenon, that God is intimately connected with the world. We can observe it. We can explain it to the end of our capacity, or to the end of the limitations of our universe. But the fact that we're bound by the universe means we can't explain it beyond that. But I'm going to present a postulate. If you can explain something to the end of your capacity and to the end of the universe, but you see that it goes beyond the universe, then it's reasonable to assume that it can be explained beyond that. Just you and I are not going to understand it. God understands it. We don't. This is not faith. There are matters of faith in our religion, but this is not one of them. It's readily observable, and it's just that we see our limitations. We see that we're not God. We can't think beyond our universe.
It has to be our common sense.
Yeah.
That you just cannot go all the way to the
We can't get to God,
can't get to God.
but we can get very far. And once we've gotten as far as we could possibly get, it's not going to be all the way there, but we can assume that it goes further too. Now, again, if you missed all that philosophy, that's okay. If you didn't understand the paradox, or you didn't understand my response to the paradox, that's fine. The takeaway is that God is one. He's a unity beyond any concept that we can have, that we can conceive of. And he's an infinite God, and he's the direct creator of the universe by his own free will and every detail of the history of the universe is in God's hands, and he's intimately involved in it. So now, what could have happened is, if God wanted to, he's infinite and we're not. That's a huge jump. So God could have said, okay, well, I can do that. I'm God. Let it be. And the universe would be, and it would be one step removed from God, but it would be finite. God chose not to do that. For reasons best known to himself, God chose not to make that jump between his absolute infinity and our absolute finite physicality. He decided not to do that in one jump. For reasons best known to himself. I don't know if anybody knows why, but this is what he chose to do. He chose to create beings that are almost not physical at all, They're physical beings, but they're not what we would think of as physical. They're very spiritual beings. They're hardly corporeal at all, but they do exist. They're physical beings that God created. And then goes to the next step, from those to something a little bit more physical, and a little bit more physical, and keep going forever until you have a fully physical universe. That's how God chose to create the world. If he ever chooses to share with us why he did that, then he will. If not, then we won't know. But, and very importantly, no matter how many steps removed we are from God, everything that happens is still a direct act of God. Because again, there is no disconnect. There's a disconnect between our intelligence and God. There's no disconnect between God and the universe. Now, again, I said that in a very philosophical manner. I'm going to explain it a little bit more clearly with an example. So if you missed the philosophy, just listen to the example. Let's say after this class, if we ever get through, we go outside and we notice a breeze. It's nice and breezy outside. So where's that breeze coming from? The ultimate answer is it's coming from God. God created this breeze, and the wind is moving in our direction because God wants it to move in our direction. Now, that being said, no one would tell you that God is blowing at us. The wind is blowing because God wants it to blow at us, but God's not blowing at us. No one thinks of it that way because it isn't that way. We can study physics and we can study meteorology, and we can explain, based on very physical forces, why the wind is blowing, without mentioning God at all. But now, ask the question, where do those physics come from? Where is the energy coming from? The energy that moves the wind. Now, I understand that nobody knows for certain why the earth spins. But let's say they do. And let's say they don't, but they find out one day. It doesn't matter. All this energy that's creating physics, where is that coming from? So the energy, this physical energy, is a physical translation of a spiritual energy. So yes, there's a physical wind, and it's coming at us because of physical energy based on physics. But that energy is a physical translation of a spiritual energy. How does that work? I don't know. But you have the spiritual energy, and it becomes something physical, or translates to something physical in our physical world. That spiritual energy, where did it come from? It's also a translation of a more spiritual energy. And you keep going like that forever, possibly to infinity. And eventually you get to God. So that initial energy that God puts forth becomes more and more physical as it translates into lower and lower physical levels, and finally becomes the wind that is blowing at you. Now, that's our experience. We experience physics as a physical force. From God's perspective, as I keep saying, there is no disconnect. So from his perspective, everything is coming directly from God. Everything that happens is from God, and everything that exists is directly from God. No matter how many levels you go through to get to this physical world, from God's perspective, that's not a jump at all. That's just God acting. So more practically for us, when we pray, who are we praying to? We're not praying to any one of those spiritual forces. We're praying directly to God. The same God who is infinite and one and indivisible. We're praying directly to him because he directly relates to us. And when we do a mitzvah, we study Torah, that's a direct relationship with God. The infinite number of intermediary stages are completely irrelevant in our relationship with God. When he does something for us, when he makes a wind blow, the intermediary stages are irrelevant. And when we do a mitzvah and we try to relate to God also, the intermediary stages are irrelevant. So, for example, I have my lulav. My lulav is a palm branch. It's a very physical item. In fact, just yesterday, I plucked the dates off the same tree and I ate them. And very physical, went through my body, gave me some energy. But I'm taking this lulav and I'm directly relating to God with it, with this physical object. That's direct. There may be some intermediary stages, maybe an infinite number of intermediary stages between the physical lulav and God, but it doesn't matter. It's me and God together, directly relating with each other. A direct relationship, and we could say, since we keep using this word, infinitely direct, between us, physical, finite beings, and the infinite God. So that's our Torah concept. It's a fundamental belief of Judaism, without which you cannot be called a believing Jew.
You can?
You can't. If you don't believe in this, you can't be called a believing Jew. If you're praying to anyone else, if you're not directly relating to the one unified unit, the one God, the infinitely one God, then I don't like to use harsh words, but the word would be you're a heretic. You don't believe in what the Torah teaches. Now, that doesn't mean you have to follow everything I just said. You could have missed all that. You could have missed all the philosophy. As long as you believe that God is one, whatever one means, he's absolutely one, and you're worshiping him directly and nothing else, that's really all you have to know. Everything else is a deeper understanding of the same idea. But the main thing we have to know is there's one God and we are directly relating to him and he's directly relating to us. What will be a practical manifestation of that? Don't pray to angels. So there are angels. God created angels and the angels do the jobs that he tells them to do. And we can talk to the angels. They don't usually respond to me, but if you know what you're doing, you could probably talk to them. But you don't pray to them because they're just angels. They're just created physical beings. They're very spiritual compared to us, but they're physical beings. We don't pray to physical beings. We don't pray to other people. Even if the person in question is a big tzaddik and he is very close to God, he's still a human being. And if God directly relates to me, then how could I pray to a human being? I have to pray directly to God. That's the Torah's truth. Now let's talk about where the idolaters went wrong. This might be a little bit easier than what I've been saying. We believe in one God. No matter how many intermediary states there are, it's still one God relating directly to us. Idolaters could not understand that. Now, I can't speak for today's religions, but at least in the ancient world, nobody denied the existence of an all-powerful, infinite God. And the God that we worship, nobody denied that he exists. That was a postulate that everyone believed in. But they got stuck on this disconnect. No matter how much they philosophized, they couldn't achieve the humility to recognize that there's something beyond human understanding. So they were stuck with this disconnect between God and the universe. They couldn't get over that. Nobody could get over that. The Greek philosophers actually discuss this, or so I understand. And they talk about it at length. But They never got there. They couldn't get beyond that disconnect because human intellect can't. So if there has to be a disconnect between God and the universe, then what do we do with God? We're not going to say he doesn't exist because everyone believed in him. He has to exist. So either they said he does exist, but he didn't create the universe, or he created the universe, but not based on his own active free will. It was just the universe is a result of God's existence. Or he did create the universe, but he can't be affected by it, and he doesn't know what's going on in it because he's too infinite to be connected with the universe. Whichever of these nuances, philosophical nuances people believed in, for all intents and purposes, God was irrelevant. He existed. The same God that we worship did exist for everybody. Everybody believed in him, but he was irrelevant. The only thing that was relevant to human beings in their theology was the intermediary stages. Because again, we talk about the infinite intermediary stages between God and us. That was what people could understand. They could understand a highest God, and they could understand intermediary stages between him and us, and they could understand worshiping those intermediary stages, whether we call them angels or higher worlds or stars or however you want to refer to them. Those people could relate to because those are physical. Those are within the universe on a much more spiritual paradigm, but it's within the universe that we can relate to and think about. But the idea of directly relating to God was something that the ancient philosophers and the ancient religions could not deal with. So, for example, let's say you grew up in a country where the god of the wind was God. He was the God that everyone worshipped. Who are you worshiping? You're not worshiping wind, because that's ridiculous. You're worshiping the spiritual force or the spiritual energy that translates into physical wind. Now, we talked before about infinite stages of physicality or spirituality. So you might be worshiping stage 1 that's right above wind, or you might be worshiping stage 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000. But you're still worshiping a nature God. You're not worshiping God himself because you believe you can't. You're not worshiping the wind either. You're worshiping one of these intermediary stages, one of these, we'll call them gods. And that's what you're worshiping. Because in your mind, there has to be a disconnect between God, the real God, and the universe. Now, that disconnect makes all the difference in the world. The fact that idolaters have this disconnect between God and the universe, and we don't, is very important. Because if you're worshiping anyone other than God, anyone other than the infinite one God, if you're worshiping any kind of spiritual force, no matter how spiritual it is, you're still worshiping a blind force of nature. Now, it may be that this force that you like to worship is the archangel, and he's singing God's praises, and that's what he does at all times. And you're worshiping him by also singing God's praises because you want to be like your God. But you're still, all he's doing, this angel, is he's following his predetermined nature, and he's doing what he's, quote unquote, programmed to do. And if you're imitating him and also singing hymns, it's not anything especially moral to do that. It's just I'm doing what the God does because I want to propitiate him. I want him to treat me better, so I'm doing what he does. There's nothing moral or immoral about doing what the gods do. You're just doing what they do. If you like the god of wind, then I don't know how you imitate wind, but you do that. Again, nothing moral or immoral. You're just doing whatever God, your God does. The word is amoral. Amoral means not moral and not immoral. That's not good or bad. It's just there is no morality to it. It's just I'm doing whatever my gods do because that's what the gods do. So that's what I'm going to do. And that's how I'm going to worship them. Because if you can't worship God himself, then you can only worship the gods of nature, which are ultimately blind physical forces, no matter how spiritual they are. The errors of the ancient idolaters are in effect the same thing as the errors of today's atheists. They add up to the same thing, which is there can't be an objective morality. Everything's amoral. It's whatever, there's some kind of it's all subjective. There's no moral or immoral. It's just, this is what I'm going to do, either because my God does it, my force of nature that I worship, or because this is what I feel like doing. Either way, you're just, there's no morality. Unless you worship the one God. Unless you believe in the one God. So, we had the king of Sodom and we had Melchizedek. The king of Sodom preached dishonesty, corruption, tyranny, and conquest. That was his theology. These weren't moral values. They were just the ways of his gods. Whichever gods he worshipped. Maybe he worshipped the gods of cheating and the god of war. So he did what they did. The idea of expressing gratitude to Abraham, who saved him and who was tired and hungry, that wasn't part of this theology of the king of Sodom. Either behavior was amoral, it was neither good nor bad, it's just the appropriate way to worship his God. Now, we are creatures of God, whether we like it or not. God created us. And because he created us, we have an intuition that it's wrong to do these things. We have a conscience because we were created by God and we're designed to pursue a relationship with God. We have a conscience and we have an intuition that certain things are immoral and certain things are moral. Certain things make us feel good, not just physically good, but emotionally good, where we feel good about ourselves because we've done something objectively good. And certain things make us feel not good. We just feel like we've done something wrong. We call that guilt. It's a bad word these days. But it's a real concept. Because we are God's creatures and we're designed to pursue a relationship with him, we feel what is good and what's not good. Now, some people are better or worse at disguising that feeling or ignoring it. But we all have that intuition. No matter how much we try to philosophize and irrefutably demonstrate to ourselves that there's no such thing as objective morality, somewhere in our minds we always sense that there is. So when we do something that God is not happy about, we know it. And we do something that God is happy about, we also know it. Melchizedek. Melchizedek was the other king who greeted Abraham. So he was a priest of the Most High God. So by now we know what it means, Most High God. Everybody believed in the Most High God. Everyone believed in our God. They just believed that you couldn't have any relationship with him. Melchizedek, who was Shem the son of Noach, the most righteous son of Noach, and he had lived through the antediluvian world and the flood and the post-diluvian world. That's the flood. He had lived through all those times. He had seen God directly relating to the world. He understood that you can and should and must worship God, the one God. the science of his time and the philosophy of his time had proven irrefutably that you can't worship the one God, the highest God. Shem knew otherwise from his life experience and from the fact that he was Noah's son and he had met people who had known Adam and Eve. Shem had a direct connection with the original people, and he recognized that we can and must worship the Most High God.
Is it before flood? Yeah,
Well, he was born before the flood.
he was born before flood.
Yeah. At this point, it was quite a bit later, but he had that life experience, and he knew that we can and must worship the Most High God, not any of the intermediary forces. So he founded the city of Shalem, which means completion, perfection, and inner peace. And he preached that the only way to achieve those ends is to worship the Most High God. And the way to worship the Most High God is to pursue tzedek, which is righteousness and justice. That's why he's Malki Tzedek. Now, the reason we pursue tzedek, it's not because that's what God does, divorced from any morality, just that's what God does, so that's what I'll do. But it's because God has declared that as an objective moral value. And God is the only possible authority on the subject. That's what Shem understood. So that's the concept of the Kel Elyon, the highest God. He is the highest God because there are other gods. They're just not gods. There are other forces. There have to be other forces, intermediary forces, but they're all irrelevant to our relationship. And Shem understood that, and Shem worshipped directly the all high God, the Kel Elyon. Now, Shem, we're almost through. It's a little bit longer than usual, but I wanted to finish the topic. Shem didn't fully comprehend this most important truth. How do I know? Because Shem only said Kel Elyon, the highest God. Abraham added a title. Abraham said Hashem Kel Elyon. So Abraham understood the four-letter name of God, which represents God's intimate relationship with the world and his constant recreation of our futures. Abraham put that name first, and then he said Kel Elyon. So there was some difference in understanding between Shem and Abraham. Abraham was closer to the truth than Shem was. Now, what exactly was that nuance of difference? I couldn't tell you. I have no idea. Shem was definitely very close. In fact, Shem became the teacher of Yaakov, Avram's grandson, and Yitzchak, Avram's son. Stands to reason that he probably taught Abraham also at some point in his life. He was also a prophet. When Rivka needed to discuss her pregnancy with a prophet and figure out what was wrong with the baby, she went to Shem. Shem was the prophet that she approached. So he was definitely within Abraham's family. He was the respected prophet and the respected transmitter of the human traditions from Adam and Eve down to Noah and then through Shem. But it's also a fact that Abraham did not spend his time with Shem. I'm sure he learned whatever he could from Shem, but when he was told to leave his birthplace and go travel to Israel, he didn't go straight to Shem and spend his life as a student of Shem. Abraham understood he was supposed to create something new and go a little bit further than Shem had gone. So there was some difference between Shem and Abraham. Again, I don't know what it was. I couldn't explain it. But that was the concept. And what we've accomplished in this class was two things. Number one, we've gotten a more mature understanding of idolatry. It's not just a primitive, immature belief. It's a belief in something that actually does exist. And within the human mind, we can't understand God, so people had to worship something below God. They believed God existed, but they had to worship something below that. And then, more importantly, our Jewish belief is we believe in the one, ultimately infinite one God, who, although we can't understand, we can never fully understand how he relates to a finite world, we do accept that he does, and we observe that he does, and that he has a personal relationship with everything that we do. I will stop for questions. If anybody has to go, please feel free to do. We went a little beyond.
So I have
the time.
a question.
Yeah.
We know that after the time of the Shlomo HaMelech, the Jews started to go away from, the concept of Hashem, and pretty soon, I think it was his grandson that became idolater. Was it his grandson or Menashe?
Well, first his wives, and I don't know about his son, but yeah, some of his descendants did. Yeah.
So what happened really that they went back that way? Is that because of the other nations that they were living among them? Or
First of all, some historians would have us believe that there was a cult, a Jewish cult that worshipped God. Meaning the Jews didn't worship God, but there was this cult that did believe in the one God. That's not true. There was idolatry among the Jews in many times in history, but there was a core group of Jews who always remained faithful. Now, some people would tell you that that was most of the Jews, the vast majority. Some people would tell you that it was a small minority. Either way, it was something significant. So you have someone like Eliyahu, who lived with Achav and Izebel. He didn't come out of nowhere. And Yeshaya and Yirmiyah, these people didn't come out of nowhere. These were good, faithful Jews. They were taught by their teachers. There was a definite core of Jews, maybe a very large core of Jews, maybe the majority, who still believed in one God. But you ask why some people went away from the one God. I just explained it. It's very difficult. The idea of worshiping one God, the one God, what do you do with that disconnect? People have a lot of difficulty with that. Now, you and I don't have that problem because we are very little, small people. We don't know anything about this stuff. You may not have even understood what I meant by this paradox. And I don't really understand it either. I'm just saying it. So you and I don't have this problem. We can just worship God and it's all good. But if we were really great people like they were, we would have this problem. We would see the benefit of trying to worship the God of wind because he does exist, and we would understand what he is and how he is, and he's closer to us than God is because he's more physical. So we would have that desire to worship him. Now, we don't have it. We lost something. The Gemara talks about how the Yetzer Hara for idolatry was abolished by the sages of the Second Temple period, the beginning of the Second Temple. They prayed for the abolishment of this concept, and it was abolished. Question: why did nobody before them do that? If we as Jews have the ability to ask God to remove this concept from the world, why didn't anybody do that beforehand? Moshe should have done it. As soon as we had the golden calf, Moshe should have abolished. I mean, he certainly could have if they could have done it. If they did it 2,000 years later, he could have done it too. The answer is that we lost a lot when this concept was obliterated. the way that the reason we don't have idolatry today is because we're so small. And we don't have an appreciation for all this theology. We don't understand God at all. And we don't understand any of this stuff. So we also don't have any desire to try to worship any of these other things because we don't understand them anyway.
To those times they had much
They
higher,
were much greater people.
much greater knowledge and
Yeah.
understanding.
So they understood this stuff, and he had a real understanding of who the God of wind is, and they wanted to worship him. There was something there. There is something there. It's a real thing. And they had a real reason to want to do that. Now we're not allowed to. We have a direct connection with God, so we don't need that, and we are not allowed to do it. But they were doing something real, and it was very difficult not to.
So that's why the people started to deviate and
Yeah.
do that things.
Now you're also right. There was a lot of influence from other nations because we were supposed to get rid of all of the Canaanites, but not everyone did that. There were still Canaanites living among the Jews, and there was a lot of influence. Had they not been there, it may have been a lot better. Hey, Dennis, go ahead.
I know this might be a topic for another session, but how did the concept of worship and prayer come about?
Can you repeat that?
How did the concept of worship and prayer come about?
Good question. It didn't come about, though. Worship and prayer is something that's part of the universe because the one God is real, and he's the one we're supposed to worship. He wants us to relate to him, and talk to him. So that's prayer. It wasn't a development. It's something that Adam did.
So Hashem planted that activity or that mindset into a human mind.
Yeah, you could put it that way. It's the natural state of things that we're going to want to try to relate to God.
Okay.
Any other questions? Have a good night. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Much enjoyed.